At some point, you made a quiet decision about yourself, that there was a version of you that was acceptable, and that the version currently showing up wasn't quite it. And since then, a project has been running. Long, effortful, never fully completed. You've refined it over the years. Better books, better frameworks, better language for what's wrong and how to address it. You've made real progress in places, and yet the project continues. The gap remains. The sense that you are still unfinished. You've probably called this growth, self-awareness, the responsible work of an examined life. But here's the question that almost never gets asked. Who decided what needed fixing? And what if that diagnosis was wrong from the start? This isn't about people who are falling apart. It's about the ones who are actually holding it together. The self-aware person, the one who reads, reflects, journals, examines, who takes their inner life seriously enough to keep working on it, year after year with genuine commitment, and who still finds, quietly, that the gap never fully closes. Not for lack of effort or insight, but because something about the structure of the project ensures that completion is always slightly out of reach. Every time progress is made, the ideal shifts, the benchmark moves. There is always just ahead a better version waiting to be reached. Most people experience this and conclude they simply need to try harder, work more, understand themselves more deeply. But what if the trying is part of the problem? What if the drive to fix yourself isn't evidence of self-awareness, but a symptom of something that was never accurately diagnosed in the first place? In the 1980s, psychologist E. Torrey Higgins identified something that mapped precisely onto what many people feel but struggle to name. He proposed that the self isn't a single thing, it's at least three things operating simultaneously. The actual self, who you currently are, the ideal self, who you believe you should become, and the ought self, who you feel obligated to be, based on duty, expectation, and the internalized standards of others. The gap between actual and ideal generates a specific kind of chronic discomfort. Not acute pain, but a background dissatisfaction, the quiet, structural feeling of not quite being enough. He called it self-discrepancy, and the larger the gap, the more that discomfort compounds. But here's what Higgins' framework implies that rarely gets examined. The ideal self isn't a neutral benchmark. It isn't an objective measure of what you genuinely need to become. It's a construction, assembled over years from parental expectations, social comparison, cultural standards, and criticism that was absorbed long before you had the tools to evaluate whether it was accurate. You didn't choose your ideal self. It was built for you, and you've been chasing it ever since. Now, there's also negativity bias, the brain's deeply wired tendency to register and retain negative information more heavily than positive. Applied outward, this is a survival mechanism. Turned inward, it becomes something else entirely, a distorted lens through which self-assessment happens. Flaws feel vivid, urgent, and disproportionately real. Progress feels provisional, fragile, and never quite enough to count, which means the picture of what needs fixing is always being drawn by a biased hand. You are not running toward an accurate destination. You are chasing a finish line drawn by a brain that systematically overweights what's wrong, toward an ideal self you didn't choose and can't reach because it was never a real place to begin with. The drive to fix yourself feels like self-awareness. It presents itself as honest and responsible, the examined life or the person who takes their own growth seriously. But look at what it actually produces. Not a rival. Not the quiet settledness of someone who has done the work and reached solid ground. Instead, a sustained, intimate relationship with your own inadequacy, a permanent orientation toward the self as a problem, something requiring constant management, adjustment, and correction. This is where it gets uncomfortable. Self-discrepancy doesn't just motivate improvement, it generates shame. And shame operates differently from guilt. Guilt says, I did something wrong. Shame says, I am something wrong. Guilt is about behavior. Shame is about identity. The self-improvement project, running on shame as fuel, doesn't close the gap between who you are and who you should be. It reinforces the identity of being someone who needs fixing. Every new framework, every new area of focus, every renewed commitment to becoming better quietly reaffirms the same underlying premise, that you are not enough. This doesn't resolve into just accept yourself. That's too easy and not quite honest. Growth is real. Change is possible. The examined life is still worth living. None of that disappears. But there's a distinction between genuine development and a shame-driven project of becoming someone other than who you are. One begins from a relatively accurate picture of yourself, moves towards something real, and occasionally arrives. The other begins from a distorted diagnosis, chases a constructed ideal, measures progress with a biased instrument, and never quite finishes. One is growth, the other is a project that requires you to remain broken in order to continue. The question isn't whether to change, it's whether the version of yourself you've been trying to fix was ever an accurate picture to begin with, whether the gap you've been working so hard to close was built from reliable materials or assembled from other people's expectations and a brain that was always going to overweight what was wrong. You've been running. That part is real. But it's worth asking, once, seriously, if the version of yourself you're trying to fix doesn't exist, what has all that effort actually been building?
You should watch this video next. I think you will like it.